Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone, since we have friends connected all over the world from North America, Latin America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And of course, I hope you are all safe in this day of COVID-19. I'm Lorenzo Montanari. I'm Executive Director of Property Right Alliance, an advocacy group founded in 2005 in Washington, D.C. with the main goal to publish the International Property Right Index, which author is, since 2015, Professor Sara Levi-Carciente from the Academy of Science of Venezuela. And also, one of the goals of Property Right Alliance is to promote and defend intellectual property right and rule of law all over the world. Welcome to the Property Right Alliance policy webinar to celebrate with all of you the World IP Day, the global voices supporting intellectual property right. It is our great pleasure to celebrate also this year with all of you the World IP Day, which theme is Innovate for a Green Future. On behalf of Property Right Alliance, I want to deeply thank Dr. Francis Gehry, Director General of World Intellectual Property Organization, for his leadership in all this year, but also for this outstanding work that WIPO is doing to promote and defending IP across the world. As you may know, Property Right Alliance every year, despite publishing the International Property Right Index and organizing the policy conference, we also coordinate the International Coalition Letter to celebrate the World IP Day, bringing together a pro-IP and a pro-market organization. I want really thanks everyone. This year, 93 think tanks have signed and promote the letter. More than 50 countries are being covered with this supporter. Again, I want to let you know that this webinar is a recorded webinar, is on the record, just to make sure that you are all aware of that. Anyway, I don't want to take much more of your time for this debate. Today, we have a great agenda, great speaker. Each speaker will have around 10 minutes each. And after all presentation, there will be time for Q&A. Please write your question into the chat section, and we will pick up the most interesting question. It is a great honor for us today to have Matthew Bryan, Director of the Patent Cooperation Treaty, Legal and User Relations of the World Intellectual Property Organization. He's been director since 2004. Before joining WIPO, Mr. Bryan served as a law clerk at the United States Court of Appeal for the Federal Circuit to Judge Randall Rader and to Senior Judge Marion Bennett. He's a member of the State Bar of California since 1990. Matthew, the floor is yours for your welcoming remarks and for your presentation of the World IP Day and the work you are doing with the PCT. Thank you again for joining us. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
Yes.
Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon from a sunny Geneva at the moment. On behalf of the World Intellectual Property Organization, our Director General and Deputy Director John Sandage, I'm grateful for this opportunity to take part in the Property Rights Alliance webinar on the occasion of World IP Day. As you're aware, our theme this year, as Lorenzo indicated, is Innovate for a Green Future. And this was intended when the theme was selected to highlight that innovation provides options and is the key to unlocking the solutions and approaches that we need to create a sustainable and a green future. Of course, you all know that since the decision selecting this theme for this year's celebration, the world has been subjected to unprecedented circumstances. And with all the great losses and sorrows and stresses of the current global challenge, it also provides even yet another example of how we can draw inspiration from the unyielding human drive to overcome adversity and to find innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Every day we see governments, industry, academia, individuals all come together to support efforts to innovate our way out of the current crisis. More clearly needs to be done in relation to the current immediate crisis and the issue of climate change that the theme addresses. Some of you may have noted that last Thursday, WIPO released new figures showing that innovation in environmentally friendly technologies, as measured by international patent applications, rose only 1.3% in 2019 compared to 2018. This very modest increase, given the far-reaching effects for all of us of climate change, led our Director General to call on policymakers, businesses, academic institutions, and inventors all around the world to work together to create a green tech innovation surge that meets the requirements of our times. He also recently stated, as we look to the future, we see that intellectual property-driven innovation and innovative thinking are central to solving our shared global challenges. At this unique moment in history, WIPO's view is that we all need to reflect on the role that innovation and the IP system can play in driving global efforts to create a green future that supports the well-being of humanity. And we need to actively commit to creating a brighter, greener, and more sustainable future. To this end, WIPO has added a new feature to its website just in the last week with relevance to World IP Day. It's called the World IP Day Pledge Map, where corporations, government IP offices, research institutions, charitable foundations, universities, startups, even think tanks can sign the World IP Day Pledge Map and make a pledge to promote and support innovation for a green future. There are some sample pledges that can be found on the website to spur your thinking. Now, let me, in closing this part of my remarks, to thank and congratulate the Property Rights Alliance for its World IP Day Coalition letter that you'll be hearing more about shortly, and for its ongoing advocacy work relating to intellectual property. We at WIPO certainly have much in common with PRA and its goals of raising awareness of the importance of intellectual property rights. Now, with your indulgence, I would take just a few more moments to present a little data about WIPO's work in the area of the Patent Cooperation Treaty, where I spend most of my time, and touch on some recent developments relating to the current crisis. Let's see if I can do this.
Let me know if you need any help with the uploading.
Yeah. Why don't you, if you could show my slides, Lorenzo, that may be the easiest. Now, let's see.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go. Can you see them now?
Yes.
Okay. Just very briefly, this is the state of the PCT world today, the geographical footprint of a PCT application filed anywhere in the world today. You can see that much of the world, colored in blue, those are member states of the PCT. When I first joined WIPO quite a few years ago now, we had between 50 and 60 member states. The map looked very different. Now we have 153 contracting states that you can see all listed on the next slide. That doesn't mean that the whole world is covered. You can see that there are regions of the world where there are countries indicated in gray, which are not yet members. And here we've helpfully listed them all for you. We look forward to welcoming all of these countries into the PCT system when they're ready to do so. And we are in talks with many of them currently about how that can happen. Just a footnote to drop that we are celebrating this year 50 years since the diplomatic conference of the PCT that took place in 1970 in Washington. And we'll be putting up more on our website in the near future to celebrate that fact. For those of you who follow the PCT or are users of the PCT in your respective areas, will have noted the recent statistics we posted that last year, 2019, was another record year for the PCT. Almost 266,000 applications filed, which was 5.2% increase over 2018. That makes, in 40 years of its operation, 41 years, only 1 year in which it had declined back in 2009. Where did they all come from? Well, another historic occasion from last year was for the first time ever, China became the #1 user of the PCT system by numbers of applications filed. It went ahead of the United States, as you can see here. It's very telling that if you look at the right side of the slide, more than half of all applications now come from the Asian region, as opposed to Europe and North America. These were the top PCT applicants in 2019 by numbers of applications that are published. You can see it goes from more than 4,000 down to 1,000 in the top 15. Also, universities make very significant use of the PCT system from all across the world. Now, very quickly, let me finish with some words about the current crisis. Most of the receiving offices who accept PCT applications across the world are open and receiving applications, as we are here at WIPO. There has been a lot of disruption to the postal and even private delivery services. We announced almost a month ago that we were suspending sending documents on paper in relation to PCT applications. There's a lot more information about all of this on our website. Our Director General then issued very recently an interpretation of one of the PCT rules so that excuse of delay is possible for PCT time limits. And we have recommended to all of the PCT offices and authorities across the world to adopt similar recommendations and interpretations, and to give applicants additional time before taking the ultimate steps of declaring applications withdrawn, for example, if fees were not paid in a timely manner. We also just posted a webinar last Friday that you can watch. It's recorded, it's on our website, it's free of charge, explaining all of these changes in more detail. There are ongoing discussions between WIPO and its member states about additional ways in which we can take actions, in which we can maybe amend regulations in the various treaty systems to take account of the current dislocation everyone is suffering. We also posted recently on our website in our global patent database, a new search functionality to allow the identification and retrieval of published patent documents that might be useful to innovators in the COVID space. Very last slide. In addition to all of this, the PCT issues, the COVID-related issues, just a few footnotes about what else is going on at WIPO. One, we have a new Director General nominee, Darren Tang, the head of the Office of Singapore, has been nominated. Next week, the WIPO assemblies will be taking action on that nomination to appoint Mr. Tang as Director General. Last year was a good year for multilateral engagement with WIPO, 55 new accessions and ratifications to our treaties. There's an ongoing discussion you may have read something about online about between the interface between artificial intelligence and intellectual property. That is continuing. And most recently, we have added a new service to what we offer called WIPO Proof. It's an online digital timestamping service that will be launched in our space very soon. With that, I will stop sharing. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Maciel, for your presentation. It's very interesting to see how the world is improving in terms of protection of intellectual property right, and it confirms more or less also what we recorded since 2007 up to today with our index, that the property right protection improved by 4.5%. Saying that, really, thank you again for joining us. Really is a great honor. I want to move to Phillip Thompson, as my colleague, IP and Trade Specialist for Property Right Alliance. Phillip Thompson is a Master in International Commerce and Policy from the George Mason University, and he collaborates with the Morning Consult, DC Examiner, and Daily Caller. And he will be here presenting the World IP Day Coalition letter around the Property Right Alliance. Phillip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right. So thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Lorenzo. And thank you, everyone who's able to join us. And especially thank you to all the IP creators that have made these technological innovations possible, so that even though we're social distancing, we can still celebrate birthdays, weddings. My college, we had our 10-year reunion over the weekend on Zoom. And we're also able to celebrate World IP Day together. And I think that's what, well, this Sunday and this event is all about. And every year we issue a global coalition letter so that with one voice, the free market community can celebrate the role of innovation and the role of intellectual property rights. This year we received a record number of signatures. We did last year and the year before that, so we hope to continue We received 93 think tanks from 45 different countries supporting the letter this year. Property Rights Alliance, we also issue the International Property Rights Index every year. The 2019 edition, we included 129 countries. That's 94% of the world's people, 98% of the world's GDP. 1/3 of that index is dedicated to intellectual property rights protections that Lorenzo alluded to. What we've found since 2007, since we've been doing it, IP protections have increased 4.5% for the whole year. There's two regions that really dominate in the IP sector. I'm sure you can guess. That's Western Europe and North America. And it's been great for their economies. Their IP offices, every few years, they publish the report on the IP intensive sectors. So we know that together they employ 108 million people, and they enjoy a wage premium in their sectors of 53% greater than their peers and non-IP intensive sectors. And this is something the free market global community thinks that the rest of the world needs to enjoy these same protections at the same level, because after all, these property rights are not just for boosting the economy or boosting innovation. They're human rights, and they allow creators to own their work, control its use, and prevent theft of their works. What's revealed in the index is that, unfortunately, there's a large gap between these regions and others in the world. The largest gap in IP protections is with Sub-Saharan Africa. Their score is 42% smaller than Western Europe and North America. That's followed by Central and Eastern Europe, 38%, Latin America, 37% gap, and Middle East and North Africa, 35%, and Asia and Oceania is 29%. The good news in the index is that these regions are also increasing their IP protections faster than those at the top, which have mostly plateaued at an 8 or 9 point on a 10-point scale. The region that's grown the fastest since 2007 is Latin America. They increased their IP protections 2.3% per year. That's followed by Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe 1.6% a year, Asia and Oceania 1.15%, Middle East and North Africa 0.75%. And what we should all be really concerned about is Sub-Saharan Africa especially, because their IP growth rate is only 0.38%, which is much smaller than North America, which is a 0.71% increase in IP protections per year. So this is where this gap could actually be growing, where it's shrinking everywhere else. But even in Latin America, which is growing the fastest in their IP protections, it will still take up to 23 years for them to catch up to where North America is today at 8.05. And I think that's something that should give us all pause for concern, because I think what the COVID pandemic has really revealed is that, and even before COVID, the challenge WIPO was calling us for was innovations for a green future. Now we have a crisis of innovation for addressing the COVID pandemic. So the world has these challenges, and we really need many more people to be, and regions to be participating at the same level and that the highest regions enjoy. And so, but it's not just about attacking the next innovations, but I think we all agree that the world benefits more when we are able to reap and enjoy the contributions, artistic contributions, the technological innovations, and that when our entrepreneurs can defend their brand and their reputation in the market through trademarks, that this is something that benefits economies and home countries, but it also benefits people and society on a global level at the same time. So I thank you for your time. And I can send a link to our letter also.
Yeah, if you want to mention the key point of the letter for maybe someone that didn't have a chance to read it, the main key message of the letter that is being supported by 93 supporters.
Yeah, our message is that IP protections boost the economies, that they, I mentioned Western Europe and North America, they have a huge IP intensive sector. Across the world, we know also trademark intensive sectors are the main employers in the IP economy, but also, especially since we're talking about COVID, there's a huge correlation with IP protections and the Biopharmaceutical Environment Index that we're all rooting for the leading scientists and the health sector to develop the next vaccine and treatments for this disease. And this is something that only countries that have the highest levels of protection attract that type of investment for frontier research. It takes about usually 10 or 12 years to develop a new medicine, and now we're working with, all countries are working with their approval agencies. In the United States is the FDA, to see what we can do to speed that up. And this is the central message of the letter, is that all countries, we have 45 countries in the letter, including countries you wouldn't usually associate with IP, which is like Mongolia, and I'm glad we have Vladimir here from Brazil, and Latin America has a big turnout in the letter. And we just want to raise the voice that IP protections are something that the whole world is looking for.
No, thank you so much, Philip, really. And also let me say that Phillip Thompson is also the author of the Trade Barrier Index, one of the first indexes that tried to combine with a holistic approach the level of protectionism all over the world. So we try also with this index to promote the culture of free trade. Thank you again, Philip, for your outstanding work and for being the author also of this new index. I want to move now to Professor Mark Shultz. He's a Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company and Doe Chair in Intellectual Property Law and the Director of the Intellectual Property and Technology Law Program at the University of Akron School of Law. Professor Schultz, thank you for joining us. He will be going to speak about how IP gets new products and medicine to people. I will ask everyone who is not speaking to mute himself to avoid background noises.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I'll share my screen now. Lorenzo, while I'm doing that, I want to mention that that it appears that I'm not able to use the chat channel on here. It says you have to make me a team member. So if that's the case for everyone, you're not going to get any questions through the chat channel. Just letting you know.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay, so today I'm going to talk about IP's role in getting medicines to people. And to do so, first, I'm going to talk about Coca-Cola, of all things. Why Coca-Cola? That seems rather trivial when World IP Day is focused on green tech, and of course, we all have our minds on biomedical innovation. Well, the reason for that, oh, excuse me, just lost my...
Give me 1 second, Mark. Let me mute everyone because there are people.
Okay.
And try to unmute yourself again. Okay.
All right.
And yes, there are still noise in the background. Anyway, sorry, go ahead and unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The reason I'm talking about Coca-Cola is it does such a great job in getting its products everywhere. And this was a question asked by a pop star of all people, but it's actually a really telling question when you think about it. See, right now, the world is focused on getting the... Lorenzo, I think...
Yeah, I think there is some problem with the connection.
It sounds more like an echo. Maybe
yes.
You turn off your microphone. All right, is that better? I think it might be better now. Is it better? Okay.
That's better.
Yes.
Okay,
please,
shall I proceed? Okay. Okay. So right now we're all focused on on the birth of innovations. And that's how people often think of intellectual property, that it incentivizes, it encourages people to create new medicines, new gadgets, new drugs, new creative works, new movies, new books. But it also plays a really important role in getting them to people. So right now, yes, intellectual property is essential to encouraging people and supporting their investment in creating new products. Right now, we have over 50 vaccines in development, over 250 treatments and vaccines that were that were previously approved, that are being tested for use with COVID now. And I suspect that there's not a single one of those that the world won't know about and figure out how to get once they're developed. But that's not always the case with most products in medicines. You see, just as this quote, this telling quote asks, we've got some products that get to everybody, but many products don't. Why would that be? Well, one reason is that, and this is an appropriate question, and Coca-Cola is a great example, because Coca-Cola has a distribution chain that extends to the furthest reaches in the world. It's famous that the smallest villages, some of them with no cell phone signal, some of them with really no concept, or some of the most remote places, the few that still exist on this planet with few concept of what happens in the rest of the world, still get Coca-Cola. And how is that? Because Coca-Cola makes investments that it has some security in. So Coca-Cola invests in distribution all over the world. It has distribution chains, very local distribution chains, bottling plants, etc. It invests vast sums in that. It invests even more in getting the supply chain that gets the water and the supplies it needs to its bottling plants and to the product to the most remote customer. It invests in marketing. Often marketing is derided as unimportant, as uninterested, as something frivolous. But when it comes to, say, a life-saving medicine, perhaps the direct-to-consumer marketing isn't what's important, but doctors need to find out about it. Marketing is a form of information as well as a form of persuasion, and it's really important. And then most food products, all medicines, they need to comply with the local regulatory system. And even for something as simple as Coca-Cola, that takes an investment in every country where they distribute. And so with this example, when we think about it, what does it take to get a product like Coca-Cola everywhere? A great business model, tremendous creativity, but a big investment in every component of getting the product to the customer. And what encourages and this is the process of commercialization. We often think about innovation, invention, but we sometimes give short shrift to commercialization. And commercialization is really important. And in fact, Apple, for example, moving to a different example from Coca-Cola, Apple's genius has been in doing this, in building products, taking an innovation that already existed. The smartphone had been a possibility for several years. Tablets had existed for several years. What Apple did is it refined the product into a model, into a version that consumers could enjoy and use, and it's really taken the world by storm and in some ways transformed our lives. And this requires a big investment. The tablet existed, the smartphone existed, but really they were niche products. They weren't in everybody's home until Apple made an investment in building and in commercializing and building the infrastructure to deliver it. And so we need to remember that innovation is a two-step process. You innovate to get the things, to get these great inventions, to get these great creative works. And But the second step requires commercialization, and most things require further development. I talked to the founder of Moderna several months ago. It was a privilege to talk to him, Dr. Derek Rossi. Moderna is the first company that to get a COVID vaccine to human trials. And several months ago, before all this started, I had asked Dr. Rossi, sometimes people say, do we really need the IP-driven commercial pharmaceutical industry? After all, we have these things invented in government labs, in university labs. I said, could we replace that? And his response was not a chance. You see, he said, after he said not a chance, he explained that there's this tremendous infrastructure of specialists who help take a drug from a great idea, develop it into a treatment for patients, take it through human trials, get regulatory compliance, teach doctors about it. Without that infrastructure and the tremendous investment in it, we would not get these treatments. So what gives a business security to make these investments? Intellectual property rights. We need, if we want to get something from just a great idea, from an insight into patients' hands, what we need to do is protect the tremendous investment that goes into commercializing the product. And every form of IP plays a role in this commercialization process. Trademarks, patents, trade dress, and trade secrets are all important to protecting this investment. And so I think it's so important to recall that just because a product exists, just because there's a promising innovation, doesn't mean consumers get it. And countries that don't protect the investment in commercialization through providing IP rights are going to miss out on many of these products. Okay, so this is a theoretical. Is there evidence for what I say? Yes. What we see is in research that's been done over the past 20 years, we see repeatedly a relationship, a correlation between stronger patent rights and greater imports of key products, of technology-intensive products, both medicines and key information technology and computer products. We also see, this illustrated graphically with the Janarte Park Patent Index shows that across a number of industries, you will see a greater increase in imports. But one key question many ask who have insight into this area is, when you say a greater volume of imports, is this just the market expanding, or is this just the IP owner getting more money? And that's an important question, because it's just, if we're just shifting around wealth, then, and the products are getting to people anyway, then perhaps we're not achieving anything with more effective IP rights. But over the years, we have seen that indeed it's not just an increase in, it's not just a monetary increase in trade, it's an increased volume of trade, more foreign direct investment, more tech transfer, which is so important for green tech. We see all of these things correlate with more effective IP rights. Also, in recent years, we've come to see that more drugs are available in countries with effective IP rights, controlling for things like GDP per capita and level of development. The more effective the IP system, the more drugs are available in countries, studies show. And those drugs arrive sooner. And that's important too, because yes, a country can wait for the generic market to come online, but during those years while it waits, there's a tremendous loss in opportunity of achieving cures. So in conclusion, intellectual property facilitates these market building activities that eventually provide access to products by securing the investment in those market building activities, in the distribution. And we see the empirical evidence for this And so I think it's really ultimately important that we understand that intellectual property is not just about encouraging innovation or creativity, not just about rewarding it, but it's also about ensuring that people make the investments that are necessary to get products and cures to the patients and consumers who need them most. Thanks, Lorenzo.
Thank you, Mark, really for your outstanding presentation and for highlight again how IP can play an important role in supporting innovation and also to keep us safe, because without IP there could be no innovation and invention of new medicine, in this case fighting virus. With Mark Schultz, we are closing the first part of the webinar. We are entering now in the second part, where we have also a policy perspective from a think tank director. We have with us Professor Vladimir Maciel, director of the Center for Economic Freedom from the Mackenzie University. Is an academic think tank. Is presenting about how the challenge of COVID-19 to the IP system in Brazil. We have been working with Vladimir last year a lot, especially we have the pleasure to present the index in São Paulo. Vladimir is a great economist in Brazil, is a lot also the author, one of the case study of the 2019 index regarding the telecom and IP system in Brazil. Vladimir, the floor is yours, and thank you again for supporting the letter and for joining today.
Good morning for all from Brazil. Lorenzo, thank you again for the invitation. Thank you, PRA. Let me upload my presentation first.
Perfect, we can see that.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about today about the challenge of CODIV-19 to IP system in Brazil, and the issue around the same technical points of drug development that Mark told us before, but discussing what is going on in Brazil. Well, what's important? Last but not least, Brazil has been the latest country in which some lawmakers are seeking to issue compulsory license for medicines and vaccines. So this is the key point of my presentation today. So we're, how can I say, very happy that we spent 1 month in quarantine and there's any politician talking about compulsory license, but in this month of April, a group of representatives from the Congress, led by the former health minister from Dilma Rousseff, the Work Party, the last Work Party president that was impeached, introduced the bill to permit the government to temporarily suspend any and all patents for medical products that could be used for fight COVID-19. Brazil is currently under a quarantine since March 12th. The current situation is about 61, almost 62,000 diagnosed people and 4.2 thousand deaths. Well, probably the economic activities will gradually return after May 12th, but it don't depend on the evolution of the number of deaths. Meanwhile, in the Congress, there is this bill about compulsory license for medicine and all discussion of IP protection about medicines and vaccines and all the process. What they are trying to do is to change or to adding an amendment with the property law The IP property law is number 90,279. And this was only used 2 times in Brazil after the law. So one case in 2005 and another case in 2007. Both are about medicines that are used in HIV treatment. And in Brazil, HIV treatment are funded by taxation. So the public policy, health. And the issues that, at that time, Caletra from Abbott Laboratory and Efavirenz from Merck was facing the problem of compulsory license. The issue was to reduce the price paid by the government from both medicines, and one of them was being produced in Brazil. They're trying to produce it by the state lab connected to the Ministry of Health in Brazil. But just to have an idea, the discussion, the first of them started at 2005. Excuse me, are you seeing my presentation?
Not now.
No. Something happened.
I can try. Okay, it's uploading right now. Yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Let me see. Was here. So in the end, they started the initiative for compulsory license in 2005, and after approved all the process, they took more than 2 years to start producing by the state lab. So just to have an idea, 4 years between trying to break the IP protection and started producing. So it lost 4 years in the discussion while we could be using the medicine and find another ways to get a better budget. And after this experience, nowadays under COVID-19, what they are doing in the Congress, the former Ministry of Health, they are trying to implement this amendment in our IP protection law. So they are declaring that under any declaration of public health emergency or national concern, the national authorities will be granted by the force of mandatory compulsory license for all patents applications and for all technologies used to address the respective health emergency. So we're talking about not only COVID-19, but anything that can happen after this disease. So it's open a window of intervention and going in the opposite way of incentive research and new findings, because as Mark told us before, the issue is that we need to invest a lot of money to create new medicines, new vaccines. And in the end, there will be mandatory license or a compulsory license to use without paying the respective investment costs. So this is what's going on in Brazil. Last but not least, the last country that was proposing this, and the issue that being the last, that the justification for the bill is saying after country number A, B, C, and D are doing compulsory license, we are proposing to do the same in Brazil. So this is kind of reflecting what's going on around the world. So this is what's going on, Lorenzo, in Brazil in terms of IP protection right now related to COVID-19.
Thank you, Vladimir, for your presentation, and thank you for highlighting the risk of compulsory licensing. In this month, we noticed that the issue of compulsory licensing is a problem that is affecting center-right government as well as center-left government. We see there is a politician that are moving forward on compulsory licensing in Israel, in Canada, in France, in Germany, in Chile, in Ecuador. So this explain one more time that among politicians, policymakers from the center left and the right, there is a huge lack of education of the importance of intellectual property right. And this is where I guess all of us, and with the great work of WIPO, we should stand all together on that. Last but not least, of course, I want to introduce Jasson Urbach, is our next speaker, and is the director of Free Market Foundation based in South Africa. Jasson is running the Free Market Foundation, is an independent think tank founded in 1975 to promote and foster open society, rule of law, economic freedom, property right. He has an extensive list of publications. We had the pleasure to present the index a few years ago together with Professor Sally Levy-Karsinti, that I see she's connecting and follow us today. And South Africa has been doing and going in a very different problem affecting property right, from IP and from the physical property right. So Jasson is going to told us about what's going to happen and what's happening right now in South Africa in terms of removal of the intellectual property right system. Jasson, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very kind introductions, Lorenzo. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you, Philip, and the entire Property Rights Alliance team for their excellent work in raising the profile of World Intellectual Property Rights Day. So I think the phrase "never let a good crisis go to waste" is aptly describes what you've just been talking about now, Lorenzo. And what we've witnessed over the course of the last few weeks is that governments the world over have increased their power over citizens, and we've seen a significant curtailment in individual rights and civil liberties. And for those of us who believe in the sanctity of private property rights and the role that a robust intellectual property rights regime plays in fostering innovation and economic development, I think we certainly have our work cut out for ourselves if we're going to roll back the state. So I think governments, mainly spurred by activists, are absolutely salivating at the prospect of using the COVID-19 pandemic to tear down the patent rights system in a mistaken belief that patents act as a major barrier to access to medicines. And if we look at South Africa specifically, that certainly has been the case. We've seen a lot of rhetoric in the papers recently talking about the time to reform the patent system in South Africa. And of course, South Africa has been a really important battleground in the past. And I think many other African countries still take their lead from South African policymakers. So I think the direction rather of change, of policy change in South Africa is a really important from a geopolitical perspective. So before we go into some of the detail surrounding South Africa's IP policy, I'd like to reinforce what some of the previous panelists, specifically Mark and Philip, alluded to by pointing out that innovation is everywhere and surrounds us in our everyday lives. And when we say that one country is more innovative than another country, we don't mean that the people there are more or less innovative. What we mean is that the country that is considered more innovative has established an infrastructure that enables these ideas and to turn them into successful products that can reach others in society. That's exactly what Mark was referring to when you were saying that it's a two-step process. So I think individuals and businesses across the globe rely on governments to create an enabling environment and to provide the certainty that the ideas and products will be protected through institutions such as private property rights, impartial courts, and predictable laws and regulations. And it's these institutions that give product developers and manufacturers the incentive to innovate and invest, and are thus critical for safeguarding the value of innovation and investment. So whilst developed countries have typically benefited from the creation of wealth around IP, which I think was once again aptly demonstrated by the IPRI results that Philip spoke about earlier on, the same cannot necessarily be said for developing countries, at least not yet. And they are playing catch up and need to close that gap. And I'm sure we are all aware that the benefits of IP protection are simply enormous. We see the statistical correlations between robust intellectual property rights environment and improved economic growth outcomes and GDP per capita, etc. Now, recognizing the benefits of a robust intellectual property rights environment, I think many developing countries have implemented reforms that bolster their IP protections. Now, as Philip alluded to earlier on, this progress has been somewhat uneven, and some countries such as South Africa, for example, have slid down the rankings, both in absolute and relative terms. And that's obviously due to their poor policy decisions. So I suppose what I'm about to discuss now is more of a policy prescription of what not to do, because South African politicians tend to have this uncanny knack of cherry picking the world's worst policies and then imposing them on its citizenry. So I do hasten to add, however, that this was not always the case, and traditionally South Africa had a proud record of upholding intellectual property rights that were generally lacking elsewhere on the African continent. And this was one of the factors that attracted a relatively large amount of foreign investment to the country and contributed to the development of local industry. And it has also resulted in South Africans being able to access some of the world's most advanced goods and services, and ultimately allowed South Africans to become healthier, wealthier, and happier. So if we look at South African policy specifically for at least the last decade, the market has been beset with a great deal of policy uncertainty. And this is probably due to the fact that for over a decade, we've had, the critics of the patent system have lobbied to fix the patent laws in a misguided attempt to improve access to medicines. So for many years, there was much speculation about the direction of policy change in South Africa, but I think the South African government firmly nailed its colors to the mast in 2018 when it published the intellectual property policy. And the consequences of this policy have been entirely predictable. We've seen a slow and steady erosion in the intellectual property rights environment, specifically within the country, and which was captured by the International Property Rights Index. We saw it peaked in 2017 and has dropped off significantly now, down according to their latest published index. And we've also seen, for example, the number of innovative pharmaceutical manufacturing companies leave the country in their droves. So we expect this process to continue as the policy environment deteriorates. And I think turning specifically to the IP policy in South Africa, one of the first things to point out is that there's this inordinate focus on pharmaceuticals and patents. Hence my focus of my topic conversation today. And this is to the detriment of all other manner of IP, such as trademarks, copyrights, industrial designs, etc. And I think the IP policy contains a number of very worrying provisions that seek to undermine the intellectual property rights environment in South Africa. So I'm going to talk about two key policy decisions that were published in the IP policy. The first basically alludes to the fact that the government would like to make it more difficult to register patents. And then the second is it would like to make it easier to break patents. With regards to the former, the policy that I'd like to pick out is the government's intention to introduce what's known as a substantive search and examination system. And then with regards to breaking patents, it has introduced wording to the effect that it would like to introduce workable compulsory licenses into South Africa, which will obviously require an amendment to the Patents Act. Before I go into any of the detail, I'd just also like to point out something that Lorenzo alluded to earlier on in the introduction, and that is that I think the greatest threat to the South African economy is actually the assault on property rights in the form of government seeking to amend Section 25 of our Constitution, which is commonly referred to as the Property Rights Clause. And what the government wants to do is to introduce a policy of expropriation of private property without compensation. Now, in such an environment, I think innovators will simply not innovate and will certainly not invest in a country where property rights, both physical and intellectual, are under immense threat. So getting back to the two policies within the IP policy that give me sleepless nights, I think the one where government would like to shift from the current depository system to a substantive search and examination system, I don't think there's anybody who's opposed in principle to a substantive search and examination system, but for a poor developing country such as South Africa, it's completely inappropriate. Because one of the major constraints that we're facing in South Africa is that we lack the professionals with the requisite skills in order to handle a more intensive and extensive system. And South Africa, in fact, had an examination system in the 1950s that it introduced in the 1950s, rather, but then it had to abandon it in the 1970s because we simply didn't have enough people to do the job. As I'm sure you're aware, it's highly specialized. You need someone that is both a lawyer and a scientist who will do the job at a government salary. So South Africa not only lacks the capacity in terms of skilled individuals, but it also is on its knees in terms of its fiscal space, and it just doesn't have the resources, both technical and administrative, I suppose, to administer the system efficiently and effectively. So I think the results of moving towards a substantive search and examination system are entirely predictable. It will just increase the delays, and it will also lead to a situation where it raises the cost, which will obviously adversely affect local innovators. So I think the big elephant in the room here is that most of the patents that are registered in South Africa are first registered in developed countries where they have been gone through a substantive search and examination system. So for a poor developing country such as South Africa, it makes imminent sense to have a depository system. And I can go into more detail in the Q&A section, but I'd like to move on to what the government refers to as introducing a system of workable compulsory licenses, and it plans to do this via a non-judicial review mechanism. So currently, applications for compulsory licenses in South Africa are subject to a judicial process before the Commissioner of Patents. But government, I think once again, spurred on by activists, view this as far too onerous and want to be able to bypass the courts in order to make it easier for them to break a patent. And if this is passed into law, it will obviously have serious ramifications for investment, innovation, and obviously access to medicine. And I'm of the opinion that this has more to do with industrial policy, and specifically the South African government's desire to break patents and give the license to the state-owned manufacturer Kettler, rather than a genuine desire to increase access to medicines in the country. So to end off, I would just like to talk about some specific policy recommendations that I think the South African policy makers can capitalize on in order to increase access to medicines, and they can do this by the simple stroke of the statutory pen. And I think a lot of these recommendations might also be applicable to other developing countries. So one of the most frustrating problems is the inability of the South African drug regulator to approve medicines in a timely manner. And most of the time, these drugs have already been approved by advanced country drug regulators. So currently, we're sitting on a backlog in South Africa of 16,000 applications. And of these, about half are over 5 years old, and 90% are for generic medicines. So using the current strategies, it would take approximately 8 years to clear the backlog. And this is even if there are no new applications were received by the drug regulator. So the important point here, obviously, is that not only do these delays reduce revenues and increase the cost to drug makers, but they deny and retard patients the timely access to the medicines that could potentially cure them or substantially improve their quality of life. So I think the reason for these substantial delays obviously goes back to the fact that we've got human resource capacity constraints within the country, but another is the government's pro-generics policy. So this legislation mandated the importation of cheaper drugs from overseas, and the compulsory substitution of innovative drugs with generics within the public healthcare system. So as soon as the government introduced the system, it obviously and naturally led to an explosion of generic applications that has completely overwhelmed the system. And that's why we've seen that 90% of the drugs of the 16,000 are generic applications. So our proposal to deal with this backlog is to persuade the government and the drug regulators specifically to adopt what's known as a reference-based system, and to dissuade it from undertaking the entire review process of every new drug application itself, but rather to draw on the work of larger, better resourced foreign drug regulators, such as the United States' Food and Drug Administrator and the European Medicines Authority. So this would prevent the duplication of efforts, save public money, and most importantly, speed up access to vital medicines. Finally, I just think I'd like to point out that I think healthcare activists often overlook the fact that the South African government regulates the price of medicines sold in the private sector, and the pricing controls compel all manufacturers and importers to sell their products at the same price to all of their private sector customers, regardless of the size of the order. And it also prohibits them from entering into negotiations to offer discounts or even to donate medicines. And I think this is a very important point. If we are going to find a vaccine or a treatment for COVID-19, the South African government needs to reverse this regulation as a matter of urgency in order to allow the private sector to enter into negotiations with one another. Finally, I'd just like to wrap up by saying, well, South Africa has experienced some well-documented stockouts of essential medicines in public clinics. And these stockouts have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with patents and are due instead to the numerous failures that exist throughout the South African government's, the South African government-run healthcare system. And fixing the patent laws in South Africa will do nothing to increase access to life-saving drugs when we know that patients at government-run establishments cannot even access cheap off-patent medicines. So on that note, I'd just like to thank you once again, Lorenzo, and thank the entire Property Rights Alliance network for all of the very good work that they've been doing to raise the profile of intellectual property rights all across the globe.
Thank you, Jasson, for your outstanding presentation and for also announcing what is happening in South Africa and which way, unfortunately, the government of South Africa is moving forward to destroy the concept of property right as a system. If we are running out of time, but I think it's worthwhile to have at least a few minutes of Q&A. If there is any specific Q&A, I don't see in the chat any specific question. So if I take advantage of my role of moderator, I would like to ask a quick question to Matthew Bryan, Director of WIPO. Basically, what are the main challenges that WIPO is facing every year in terms of educating, if we can use this word, the governments all over the world?
Thank you, Lorenzo, for the question. The challenges we face in relation to governments is more demand than it is anything else. WIPO, as you know, is made up of the governments. We are, as a UN specialized agency, we are the board of directors of WIPO, if you will, are all of the member states. And many of the member states come to us on an ongoing basis asking for assistance, legislative assistance for the most part, in helping to prepare their national laws and regulations, and then also helping to do training of their patent examiners, of their private sector, of their corporate sector. And so what WIPO spends a huge amount of time and effort and money and manpower on is trying to keep up with the demand that we get from member states, which is encouraging in a way, because if the member states want more information, want more training, want more legislative assistance, that's a positive thing. Now, of course, WIPO has no mandate to impose any particular solution on member states. They ask us for what they want, and if they want to implement exceptions and limitations on IP rights, as is their right to do so under the TRIPS agreement, then of course we provide them with appropriate mechanisms to do so. So I would say the biggest challenge is just keeping up with the ongoing, consistent demand. Initially, that was developing countries. Now it's moving more to the least developed countries who need our assistance, want our assistance, request our confidential assistance to prepare them and help them be ready for the IP challenges of the future.
Okay, thank you so much. And really, again, thank you for your outstanding work you're doing with WIPO. I think is full of challenging and it's not easy time. We are running out of time. I don't see any specific questions. So I found this debate and all the presentations extremely interesting. What emerged, if I can try to summarize very quickly, is that the protection of intellectual property right is an imperative to innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth. When these rights are not secure, projects and their unique identifier are subject to infringement. This reduces economic incentive to innovate and enter a new market. Studies have continuously shown the country with a strong IP regime enjoy higher per capita GDP and greater overall level of development. And this is the reason we, as a Proprietary Alliance, everyone join this letter. We stand with for the intellectual property right, and we want to support innovation, creativity, and free market economy. Again, I want to thank everyone, all of you, for your great presentation and all the participants all over the world for their time to attend, to celebrate with us the World IP Day. And we look forward to work again and again and again with all of you, and also with, of course, with WIPO and with the new Director General of WIPO. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you for celebrating the World IP Day. Looking forward to work with all of you. Thank you.